My daughter woke me at 4:30 in the morning, her command cutting through the dark. "Mom, make some coffee and set the table," she said, tightening her robe like a landlord inspecting a rental. "He likes it ready when he comes down." I silently measured the grounds, my internal clock ticking down. They thought I was their servant. But that pot of coffee was the first step in an execution I had planned for days. My name is Margaret O'Rourke, but standing here in the pre-dawn shadow of my own kitchen, I feel less like the owner of this house and more like a ghost haunting the help. It is 4:30 in the morning in Seabrook, Maine. Outside the window over the sink, the world is pitch black, save for the faint, rhythmic greyness of the Atlantic Ocean churning against the rocks. The air inside the house is cold, the kind of damp chill that settles into the floorboards of these old coastal timber homes. But the frost forming in my chest has nothing to do with the weather. "Mom, make some coffee and set the table," Olivia whispers, though the command cuts through the silence like a dropped plate. "He likes it ready when he comes down." My daughter stands in the doorway, tightening the belt of her silk robe. She is 30 years old, yet she surveys the kitchen with the critical, sweeping gaze of a new landlord inspecting a problematic investment. She runs a finger along the edge of the counter, checking for dust, her posture radiating an arrogant ownership that makes my stomach turn. I watch her, feeling the familiar sting of humiliation rise up my throat, hot and sour. I am making it. "Olivia," I say, keeping my voice dangerously level. I reach for the bag of dark roast, measuring out the scoops with mechanical precision. 1, 2, 3. Inside my head, however, I am not counting coffee grounds. I am counting down the minutes to the performance. Upstairs, sleeping in the guest room that he has already begun to refer to as the master suite, is Brandon Hale. He is 39 years old, wears suits that cost more than my annual heating bill, and possesses eyes that constantly calculate the liquidation value of everything they touch. They do not know that the vintage clock on the wall is exactly 15 minutes fast. They do not know that last night, while they were drinking my wine and laughing about how rustic this town is, I stood on a stool and wedged a tiny, high-definition camera onto the top shelf of the spice rack, hidden behind a jar of dried basil. I did it because of what Olivia said to me yesterday evening. She had looked at me with a pity that felt violent and said, "He expects breakfast at 5. Mom, it's the least you can do. The least I can do." I arranged the silverware on the table. Fork on the left, knife on the right, blade facing in. I remember the first afternoon Brandon walked through my front door. He did not look at me. He looked past me, his eyes darting to the exposed wooden beams and the wide plank floors. He did not see a home. He saw an asset class. He had smirked, a tight little expression that suggested he had just found a $100 bill on the sidewalk. Suddenly, heavy footsteps thud against the ceiling above us. The wood creaks under the weight of a man who walks like he owns the earth. Olivia jumps, her eyes widening in panic. "Is that him, Mom? Hurry. Put the heavy cream out. You know, just how he likes it." I pull the small pitcher of cream from the refrigerator. "Yes," I whisper to myself, a cold smile touching my lips that she does not see. Exactly how he deserves it. The footsteps descend the stairs. I place the steaming mug at the head of the table, my husband's seat. Brandon enters the kitchen. He looks fresh, sharp, and utterly confident. At that exact moment, the sun breaches the horizon across the bay, sending a shaft of pale, revealing light across the breakfast table. I pull out the chair for him, the legs scraping harsh and loud against the floor. "Sit, Brandon," I say, staring right into his calculating eyes. "We have a lot to discuss before your big day. To understand why I was standing in my kitchen at dawn with a hidden camera, we have to go back 10 days. Just 10 days ago, my life was small, quiet, and exactly the way I wanted it. I am not a woman who is easily fooled by numbers. For 30 years, I worked as a senior accountant for Harborline Mutual. I spent my days hunting for the story buried in the spreadsheets, finding the discrepancies that people tried to hide between the rows of profits and losses. When my husband passed, I took an early retirement package and moved back to the old timber house my parents left me here in Seabrook. It is not a mansion, but it sits on a prime stretch of coastline where the Atlantic hits the granite hard enough to shake the floorboards. My relationship with Olivia has always been complicated. She lives out in Stonebridge, a bustling city in the Midwest where appearance is the only currency that matters. She is my only child, and perhaps I am to blame for how she turned out. Since she was 20, she has treated me less like a mother and more like a financial safety net. She loves me, I think, but she loves the security I represent even more. Before the storm arrived, my days were peaceful. I would sit on the back porch with a mug of black coffee, watching the thick morning fog roll off the bay, listening to the local news on the radio. Tuesdays and Thursdays were for the watercolour class at the Seabrook Arts Co-op. I was terrible at painting trees, but I was excellent at painting the ocean. It was a simple existence. I owned my time. I owned my silence. But then there were the men. Over the years, Olivia had brought home a parade of boyfriends. They were always handsome, always polite, and always possessed a terrifyingly specific interest in my assets. There was the architect who asked about the foundation and zoning laws before he asked how I was feeling. There was the software developer who casually asked to see my life insurance policy because he was just curious about the industry. They viewed Olivia as a prize, but they viewed me as a bargain bin they could rummage through eventually. The trouble with Brandon Hale started 5 months ago. Olivia called him a financial consultant. I called him a walking red flag. We had the fight over the phone a week before the wedding news. "You don't know him." "Mum," Olivia had snapped, her voice tight with defensiveness. "He is successful. He drives a Porsche. He knows how to build wealth. He is a salesman. Olivia." I had countered, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. "You have known him for 5 months. You do not marry a portfolio. You marry a person. You are just jealous," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "You want me to be alone and miserable. Just like you." "I am not miserable," I said. "I am free. There is a difference. If you can't support my happiness, stay out of my life," she shouted, and the line went dead. I sat there in my living room, feeling the heavy, wet blanket of failure that every mother knows. I wanted her to be happy. I really did. But I promised myself right then that I would not use my retirement savings to buy her love. Then came the call 10 days ago. "We eloped in Vegas," Olivia screamed into the receiver. "I am Mrs. Hale now. Can you believe it?" Her voice was drunk on champagne and victory. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, a physical reaction to the name Hale. "Congratulations, sweetheart," I managed to say. "That is a surprise." "We want to come see you," she continued, not waiting for my reaction. "Brandon thinks the coast would be perfect. We need to spend a few days at your place. You know, to decompress. The city is just too much right now. To decompress. That word hung in the air like a threat. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my address book open. My finger hovered over the number for Fred Carrigan, my attorney. He was an old shark who had handled my father's estate, and he knew every trick in the book. I thought about calling him. I thought about asking him how to ring-fence the house, how to lock down the accounts, just in case. But I pulled my hand away. Don't be a cynical old woman. Maggie, I told myself. Maybe I am just being paranoid. Maybe he really loves her. I closed the book. I did not make the call. That moment of hesitation, that desire to be a good mother who trusts her child, was the crack in the door that let the wolves in. They arrived without a phone call, just the crunch of tires on gravel and the slam of heavy car doors. I was wiping down the kitchen counter when the front door swung open, bypassing the courtesy of a knock entirely. Olivia marched in first, dragging 3 enormous suitcases, followed by Brandon, who was balancing a cardboard box overflowing with manila folders. Olivia tossed her key onto the granite island with a clatter that sounded like a claim of ownership. "We are here," she shouted, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. She did not hug me. She just stood there, breathless and flushed, waiting for applause. Behind her, Brandon stepped into the foyer. He was slicker than I remembered. He wore a tailored navy shirt that fit a little too perfectly and a watch that probably cost more than my first car. He did not look at me. His eyes immediately went to the exposed timber beams of the ceiling, then down to the wide plank oak floors, and finally to the stone fireplace. It was not the look of a guest admiring a home. It was the cold, calculating stare of an appraiser estimating square footage. "Nice flow," he said, finally nodding at me with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Great bones. Maggie. Really. Great bones." Dinner was an exercise in suffocation. I had roasted a chicken, but the tension at the table made the meat taste like sawdust. They started with small talk, but I could feel the agenda lurking beneath the surface like a shark fin's. "This house is a lot to manage, isn't it?" Brandon asked, swirling his wine. I noticed the roof might need some work, and those stairs, they are pretty steep for someone your age. "I manage just fine," I said, cutting a piece of potato with precision. "But for how long?" Olivia chimed in, too quickly. She leaned forward, her eyes wide with feigned concern. "Mom, you can't keep clinging to this old place. It is not safe. What if you fall?" Brandon knows people who help families like ours all the time. Families who need to transition. I looked at my daughter. She was reciting a script. I could see the rehearsal behind her eyes. She had already picked a side, and it was not mine. Brandon cleared his throat, leaning back in his chair with the air of a man about to bestow a great favor. "I am a senior consultant at North Shore Equity Partners," he said, dropping the name like it should impress me. "We specialize in helping seniors release the equity trapped in dead assets. I just helped a widow in Florida. Lovely woman. Move into a luxury senior condo. Pool, gym, 24-hour medical staff. She has never been happier. Dead assets," I repeated, looking around my warm, lit kitchen. "It is a financial term," Brandon said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Look, Maggie, the market is volatile. Someone of your generation, well, you just don't understand modern liquidity. You are sitting on a gold mine, but you are living like a pauper. Olivia nodded vigorously, like a student in the front row. He is right. Mum, you are stubborn, but you have to be realistic. I gripped my fork until my fingers ached. Exactly what would happen to this house in your plan, I asked, keeping my voice steady. Brandon smiled. A predator seeing a wounded deer. Simple. We transfer the title into a secured investment structure managed by North Shore. You get a monthly stipend. We handle the maintenance. And eventually, the asset is liquidated to fund your care. It is a win-win. He used words like structure and stipend to hide the truth he wanted to take my deed. I will think about it. I lied, standing up to clear the plates. As I walked into the kitchen with the dirty dishes, the noise of the running tap masked my movements. I paused, straining to hear the conversation in the dining room. Trust me, babe, Brandon whispered, his voice low and urgent. In a month. She will thank us. She better. Olivia replied, her voice hard and unrecognizable. I stood over the sink, staring at the suds, feeling the sharp, cold knife of betrayal twist in my gut. They were not here to visit. They were here to harvest. By day 2, my dining room table had ceased to be a place for meals and had transformed into the command center for a war I did not know I was fighting. Brandon spread his life across the polished oak surface, a sleek laptop, stacks of manila folders, and 3 different cell phones that buzzed like angry hornets. He spent the entire morning pacing the length of my rug, shouting into his headset about clients and closings and high-yield opportunities, though I noticed he never actually used a single real name. It was a performance, loud and desperate, designed to make him look important enough to dictate the atmosphere of my own home. Olivia descended the stairs at 10 in the morning, carrying a clipboard as if she were the camp counselor and I was the unruly camper. Mom, we need to set some ground rules, she said, blocking my path to the living room. Brandon has to make calls to the East Coast early in the morning. We can't have the television blaring the news. It is unprofessional background noise. I watched the news at 7. Olivia, I said, tightening my grip on my laundry basket. It is hardly blaring. Well, just keep it off until noon, she said, waving her hand dismissively. Also, please don't run the washing machine during business hours. The vibration distracts him. He needs total focus for the big picture stuff. The big picture stuff, I repeated. Since we are staying for a bit, it is only fair we split responsibilities, she continued, her tone sickeningly reasonable. You can handle cooking and groceries. That is your strong suit. We will handle the financial restructuring. We are doing the heavy lifting for your future. So you can handle the domestic side? I stared at her. They had been in my house for 24 hours, and I had already been demoted to unpaid housekeeper. Breakfast was an ordeal. I served toast and scrambled eggs, the same way I had made them for 40 years. Brandon took one bite of the toast and grimaced, placing it back on the plate with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. It is a little dry, he said, reaching for his coffee. He took a sip and frowned. And this roast is weak. Is this generic? It is the same coffee I have drunk for 20 years, I said. He is just used to a certain standard. Mum? Olivia interjected quickly, patting Brandon's hand. Brandon has a very refined palate. Maybe tomorrow you can go into town and get the beans he likes. The ones from the specialty roaster, I said nothing. I just took their plates to the sink, my silence masking the noise of my blood boiling. Later that afternoon, while dusting the hallway, I paused near the open door of the dining room. Brandon was on the phone again, but his voice had dropped to a low, conspiring murmur. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath. "Yeah, the Seabrook house is a go," he said. "It is a soon-to-be-acquired asset. The location is prime." There was a pause as he listened to the person on the other end. Then he laughed, a cold, dry sound. "Don't worry about the resistance. The daughter is on board. The old lady will follow. She doesn't have the stamina to fight us. The old lady will follow." The words hit me like a physical slap. They did not see me as a person. They saw me as an obstacle, a decaying piece of furniture to be moved out of the way. But as the shock faded, something sharper took its place. They had made a critical error. They assumed my silence was senility. They forgot that before I was an old lady, I was the person who found the missing decimals that sent men like Brandon to prison. That night, after they retreated to the guest room, I did not turn on the television. I went into the kitchen and pulled my old laptop from the back of the pantry. I sat in the dark, the screen's blue light illuminating my face, and I went to work. I typed North Shore Equity Partners into the search bar. Nothing. No website. No LinkedIn page with employee photos. Just a registered agent address in Delaware, a notorious haven for shell companies. I dug deeper, cross-referencing the registration numbers. It was a ghost ship. The company had been formed 6 months ago. Before that, the same address was listed for Apex Capital Solutions, which had been dissolved by the state. Then I searched for Brandon D. Hale. It took me an hour to sift through the noise, but I found it. Buried in the public records of a county court in Ohio were 2 civil lawsuits filed 3 years ago. The charge, negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. He had advised a retired couple to invest their savings in a high-risk development that never broke ground. They settled out of court for pennies on the dollar. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the hunt. I quietly printed the documents, the rhythmic whir click of the printer sounding like ammunition being loaded. I folded the papers and slid them inside the cardboard box of cornflakes on top of the refrigerator, the one place I knew neither of them would ever look. Given their refined palates, I looked up at the ceiling, toward the room where they slept soundly, dreaming of my money. They think I am old and slow. I whispered to the empty kitchen. That is their first mistake. The next morning provided the opening I needed. While Brandon and Olivia went for a walk to scout the local aesthetic, which I assumed meant judging the neighbours' lawn care, I slipped the manila envelope out of the cornflakes box and drove straight to the centre of town. The law offices of Carrigan and Lowe have smelled of stale tobacco and lemon polish for as long as I can remember. Fred Carrigan, the man who handled my father's estate and my husband's will, sat behind his mahogany desk, his heavy brows knitting together as he read through the documents I had printed. "This is not just aggressive investing, Maggie," Fred said, dropping the papers onto his blotter with a heavy thud. "This is a classic equity stripping scheme. It is sophisticated. I will give them that. They convince you to transfer the title to a holding company for protection. Then they leverage the property with high-interest loans. They pay themselves management fees out of the loan proceeds until the equity is drained. And then they default. You lose the house to the bank, and they walk away with the cash." I felt the blood drain from my face. "My daughter, does she know? She might think it is legitimate," Fred said carefully. "Or she might be so desperate for money she is choosing not to look too closely. He reached for his phone. I want you to meet someone. There is a new federal unit, the Bureau of Senior Financial Integrity. They have been tracking a ring operating exactly like this up and down the East Coast. 20 minutes later, a woman named Lena Ruiz walked into the office. She was in her 40s, wearing a sharp grey blazer and an expression that suggested she had not smiled in a decade. She did not waste time with pleasantries. She sat down, opened a thick file, and placed a photograph of Brandon on the desk. "We know him as Brandon Hale," Lena said, her voice crisp. "But in Florida, he was Brandon Hedges. In Oregon, he was just B.J. The names change, but the method is always the same. He targets widows with coastal property, usually through a younger relative who feels entitled to an early inheritance." She spread out 3 case files. "This is Sarah," Lena said, pointing to a picture of a woman standing in front of a beach house. "Retired teacher. She signed her deed over to a trust Brandon managed. 6 months later, she was evicted. She lives in a state-subsidized apartment now." She pointed to another photo. "This is Ellen. Her family vineyard had been in her name for 50 years, gone in 8 months. I looked at the faces of these women. They looked like me. They looked tired, kind, and trusting. And then there is Claire Marsh," Lena continued, sliding a 3rd photo across the desk. "She was his wife 3 years ago, or at least, she thought she was. He used her credit and her small business to launder money from another scam. When he vanished, he left her with $600,000 in debt. She is off the grid now, hiding from creditors in rural Alabama." I stared at Brandon's smiling face in the photo. It was the same smile he had given me over breakfast when he complained about the toast. "We have been trying to pin him down for 2 years," Lena said, leaning forward. "But he is careful. He operates in the grey areas of the law until the very last second. We need him to explicitly state the terms of the fraud while the papers are in play. We need a smoking gun." She looked me dead in the eye. "You have a choice, Mrs. O'Rourke. You can go home, kick them out, and change your locks. We can put a protective order on your assets, and you will be safe. He will just move on to the next town." She paused. "Or, if you have the stomach for it, you can help us nail him to the wall. We need him to think he has won. We need him to get sloppy." I looked down at the photo of Sarah, the teacher. There was a smaller picture clipped to her file showing her standing outside a cheap motel room, clutching a plastic bag of clothes. That could be me. That could be my friend from the art class. My hands stopped shaking. A cold resolve settled in my chest, harder than the granite cliffs outside. "I am not going to let him do this to anyone else," I said. "It will be dangerous," Lena warned. "You have to play along until the very end. You have to let him believe you're exactly the weak, confused old woman he thinks you are." I stood up and smoothed the front of my coat. "If we are going to do this, we do it my way," I said, my voice steady. "In my kitchen." I pulled into the driveway and sat in the car for a full minute, practicing my breathing. When I walked through the door, I made sure my shoulders were slumped and my step was heavy. Brandon and Olivia were waiting in the living room, their heads bent together in low conversation that stopped abruptly the moment they saw me. "Where have you been, Mum?" Olivia asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. I offered a weak, tired smile. "Just a checkup, dear." At the clinic, Dr. Henderson wanted to monitor my blood pressure. He says I need less stress. Brandon's face lit up with a predatory kind of sympathy. He stood and guided me to the armchair. See, this is exactly what we have been saying. Maggie, you are carrying too much. You need to let us take the weight off. He did not waste time. Within 10 minutes, the dining table was once again covered in paper. He laid out a stack of documents that looked official and terrifying. There were power of attorney forms, equity release agreements, and a thick document titled Income Stream Product Authorization. I sat down, placing my phone face down on the table between us. I had already downloaded the recording app Lena recommended, and it was running silently, catching every word. Now, this looks complex, Brandon said, uncapping a fountain pen. But it is really quite standard. We move the title of the house into a holding entity. That entity releases the equity back to you as a monthly salary. You get cash flow, and we manage the headaches of ownership. I picked up the document, my eyes scanning the fine print. My accountant's brain screamed at me. I saw the word irrevocable buried in a paragraph about power of attorney. I saw the management fee set at 4% of the total asset value annually. It was robbery disguised as relief. I looked up, blinking rapidly to feign confusion. But, Brandon, if I sign this, does the house still belong to me, I mean? Technically, Brandon sighed, a sound of patient suffering. Maggie, ownership is a fluid concept in modern finance. You will still live here. That is what matters. Right. The entity holds the paper, but you hold the keys. It is just streamlining. I see, I said, letting my voice trail off into a tremor. It is just so many words. I don't want to make a mistake. The only mistake would be waiting, Olivia added, squeezing my shoulder a little too hard. Mum, please, do this for us. Do this for yourself. I think I understand. I lied, but I am too tired to read it all now. Can we do it in the morning? Over breakfast, Brandon looked annoyed, but he masked it quickly. Of course. A fresh start in the morning. That sounds perfect. That night, the house was silent. I could hear the wind coming off the bay, rattling the window panes. I did not sleep. Instead, I walked through the dark rooms of my home like a museum curator. I ran my hand along the rough grain of the stone fireplace my father built by hand. I touched the frame of the wedding photo where my husband and I stood on this very porch 30 years ago. I dug my toes into the wool rug my mother had woven during the winter of 1982. They wanted to turn this history into a line item on a spreadsheet. They wanted to liquidate my memories to fund their lifestyle. I went into the pantry and dialed Lena's number, keeping my voice to a whisper. He took the bait. I said, "He thinks I am ready to sign." I told him we would do it at breakfast. He is obsessed with his morning routine. He wants to feel like the king of the castle while he steals it. We are ready. Lena replied. I have a tech team in a van parking down by the old dock right now. We are linking to your kitchen camera remotely. The audio from your phone is clear, but we need the video to match the documents. Don't sign until you get my signal. I hung up and felt a strange sense of calm. There was one piece of the puzzle Brandon did not know, a piece I had put in place with Fred Carrigan earlier that afternoon. While Brandon was printing his fraudulent contracts, Fred and I had executed an emergency transfer. As of 3 hours ago, my house no longer belonged to me, nor did it belong to Brandon's shell company. It was now the property of the O'Rourke Family Trust, overseen by the Harbour Seniors Foundation. Even if I signed every piece of paper Brandon put in front of me tomorrow, it would be worthless. I had already given the house away to protect it. I walked to the hallway mirror and looked at my reflection. I looked tired. Yes. But the eyes staring back were sharp. I practiced my expression. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I widened my eyes to look a little vacant, a little fearful. I tilted my head to the side, the posture of a woman looking for someone to tell her what to do. They want a helpless old lady. I whispered to the glass, watching the transformation. Tonight, I will give them the best performance of my life. The afternoon before the breakfast that would end everything. The air in the house felt heavy, like the drop in pressure before a hurricane. Olivia found me in the kitchen, polishing the silver, a mindless task I was using to keep my hands from shaking. She leaned against the counter, picking at a loose thread on her sweater, looking everywhere except at my eyes. "Mom," she started, her voice small and hesitant. "Brandon, well, he made a really good point earlier. He said we could put the house to work. For all of us." I stopped polishing. "Put it to work?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Yeah." She breathed out, gaining a little confidence. "He says that if we access the equity, we can open a separate investment account. In my name, it would be, well, it would be enough to finally get us started in the city, a real start." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. I saw the greed. Yes. But beneath it, I saw a desperate need for validation. "You know what equity release means?" "Olivia," I said slowly, "it means a loan. It means debt on a house that your father and I paid off 15 years ago. You are okay with me carrying that debt? It is strategic debt." "Mum," she snapped, the defensive wall going up instantly. "God, you are so old-fashioned. It is just leverage. You still get to live here. Nothing changes for you. But everything changes for me." "Why is that so hard for you to grasp?" I set the polishing cloth down. "When did you start seeing me as an asset instead of a person?" I asked. "When did I become just a stepping stone to your next apartment?" Olivia flinched as if I had slapped her, her face twisted, flushing a deep, angry red. "When did I start seeing you as an asset?" she repeated, her voice rising to a tremble. Maybe when I realized you always chose this house, and your ghosts, over me. "That is not fair," I whispered. "It is fair," she cried, tears welling in her eyes. "When Dad died, what did you do? Did you come to stay with me? Did you ask how I was doing? See? You spent $50,000 redoing the porch. You spent months sanding these stupid floors. You locked yourself in here with his memory and you shut me out. You chose the wood and the stone over your own daughter. So don't look at me like I am the selfish one. If this house is all you care about, then yeah, maybe it is time it actually did something for me." I stood frozen. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the memory of those dark months after the funeral hit me hard. I had buried myself in renovation because I could not bear to face the living. I had pushed her away. I opened my mouth to tell her everything I wanted to say. "He is a con man. Olivia. He is stealing from us." But I stopped. I looked at her tear-stained face and realized she would not believe me. She was too hungry for his promises. She needed to see the monster shed his skin. "Okay," I said softly. "We will settle it all tomorrow." That night, Sleep was impossible. I paced the hallway in my socks, listening to the old house settle. As I passed the living room, I heard a low murmur. Brandon was on the phone. I pressed myself into the shadows near the grandfather clock. "Yeah, it is in the bag," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a smug purr. "The daughter is halfway in. She is desperate for approval. Once the old lady signs, we can flip the place to Atlantic Shore Holdings in under 60 days. We will be out before the ink dries." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. Then he let out a short, cruel laugh. "If she hesitates, we have options," he said. And his tone turned chillingly clinical. Cognitive decline. Unsafe living conditions. Judges love that stuff. We can have her declared incompetent and moved to a facility within a week. I have done it before. I backed away silently, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I went back to my bedroom and sat in the dark, staring out at the black void of the ocean. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was truly terrified. It was not just about the money anymore. Brandon did not just want my wealth. He was willing to take my freedom. He was willing to lock me away in a room with white walls and medicate me into silence just to get his commission. I gripped the arms of my chair. The fear was cold, but the anger that followed was white hot. "You want to declare me incompetent, Brandon," I whispered to the darkness. "You just try." My daughter woke me before sunrise and said, "Make some coffee and set the table." It was exactly 4:30 in the morning. Olivia stood in my doorway, her face a mask of nervous excitement, vibrating with a frantic energy that made her look 10 years younger and infinitely more dangerous. "He wants everything perfect before the notary gets here," she whispered, smoothing her robe with trembling hands. I sat up, blinking in the gloom, feigning the confusion of a groggy old woman. "Notary," I asked, my voice thick with sleep. "Why would we need a notary at breakfast? To make it official?" "Mom," Olivia said, turning on the hallway light so it flooded my eyes. "Brandon booked a mobile notary. He is coming at 5:30. It saves us a trip into town. It is just easier this way. For you." I nodded slowly, swinging my legs out of bed. "Oh, that is very thoughtful of him." I went downstairs into the cold kitchen. My movements were automatic, but my mind was racing with the precision of a tactical strike. I filled the coffee pot, measuring the grounds while my other hand slid into my pocket to activate the small audio recorder Lena had given me. I placed it on the counter, concealed behind the toaster. Then I reached up to the spice rack. Under the pretense of looking for cinnamon, I nudged the jar of dried basil 2 inches to the left, ensuring the hidden camera lens had a clear, unobstructed view of the head of the table. While the eggs were sizzling in the pan, my phone buzzed against my hip. I wiped my hands on my apron and checked the screen, shielding it from the doorway. Team in position. Van parked at dock. Wait for verbal confirmation before signing anything. Don't mention us. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that felt loud enough to shake the room, but I forced my breathing to remain shallow and even. I was not just making breakfast. I was setting a stage. I pulled down the second coffee carafe from the cabinet, the one Lena had instructed me to use. The handle had been dusted with a transparent UV ink, invisible to the naked eye, but glowing like a neon sign under forensic light. Once Brandon poured himself a cup, his fingerprints would physically link him to the scene, the papers, and the coercion. Footsteps thudded on the stairs. Brandon entered the kitchen, smelling of expensive cologne and victory. He wore a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, looking every inch the benevolent patriarch. He walked straight to the head of the table, my husband's seat, and sat down, surveying the room with a sickening sense of satisfaction. Smells incredible. Maggie, he said, reaching for the coffee pot I had just placed down. He poured a steaming cup, his fingers wrapping firmly around the marked handle. You know, this is exactly how I pictured our mornings here. Peaceful. Productive. He was already mentally redecorating. At exactly 5:30, the doorbell rang. Brandon jumped up to answer it, ushering in a man who looked like he had been awake for 3 days. This was Marcus Doyle, an undercover agent from the Bureau of Senior Financial Integrity, dressed in a rumpled suit and carrying a battered briefcase. He played the part of a bored, overworked, mobile notary to perfection. "Sorry about the hour," Marcus grunted, not making eye contact as he dumped a logbook on the table. "I got 3 other stops before noon. Let's get this over with." Brandon guided him to the table. "Of course. We appreciate you coming out. My mother-in-law is ready to sign. We just need to execute the transfer to the holding entity." Marcus pulled out a pair of reading glasses and peered at the documents Brandon had spread out. "This is a quitclaim deed transferring title to North Shore Holdings, LLC. He looked up at Brandon, his expression dull and bureaucratic, and the grantor retains... What exactly I need to clarify for my logbook? It says here she is waiving rights of survivorship. Brandon waved a hand dismissively, falling right into the trap. It is just standard language for the asset protection structure. She retains tenancy rights. Basically, she stays. The equity works for us. It is all explained in the rider. Right, Marcus drawled, clicking his pen. And the signatory is fully aware that this structure is irrevocable, meaning she can't get the deed back without board approval. She understands perfectly, Brandon said, his voice sharpening slightly. He turned to me, his smile tight and commanding. "Don't you, Maggie?" I stood by the stove, gripping the spatula. I think so. It means I am safe. Right. That is what you said?" "Exactly," Brandon said. He slid the stack of papers across the polished wood until they rested directly in front of my plate. He tapped the signature line with his index finger, the camera on the shelf recording every micro-movement. "All you have to do is sign here, here, and here," Brandon said, his voice dropping to a seductive whisper. "This is the first day of the rest of your life." I looked at the papers. I looked at his hand, pointing to the spot where I was supposed to sign away my existence. The trap was set. The players were in position. All I had to do was close the jaws. I held the heavy fountain pen in my hand, feeling the cold weight of it against my skin. I hovered the nib over the signature line, letting my hand tremble just enough to sell the performance. Brandon leaned forward, his eyes hungry, his breath practically hitching with anticipation. He was so close to the finish line he could taste the commission. "Brandon," I said, pulling the pen back an inch. "I am not a financier. I am just a mother. Explain it to me like I am your mother, not a client. What does this actually mean for my home?" Brandon sighed, a sharp, pressurized exhalation of impatience. He ran a hand through his hair, his charm fraying at the edges. "It is just paperwork. Maggie," he said, his voice tight. "The house will technically belong to an investment entity, but you will be safer. Olivia and I can manage the complicated stuff. You live here as a tenant? A protected tenant. It relieves you of the burden. A tenant, Olivia interrupted. Her voice was high and thin. She looked from Brandon to the papers, her brow furrowing. Wait. Are you saying the house won't be in Mom's name? Or my name? At all? Brandon shot her a warning look that was colder than the ocean outside. It is an LLC. Olivia, it is safer. We have discussed this. No, Olivia said, stepping back, her hand going to her throat. We discussed a loan. We didn't discuss losing ownership. You said it was an asset structure. A tiny voice buzzed in my ear, hidden beneath my hair. It was Lena, speaking from the van down at the dock. We have enough on the fraudulent inducement. Keep him talking. If he pressures you about competence, that is our cue. I looked at Brandon, widening my eyes. I don't think I can sign this. Brandon, it feels complicated. I think I need to call Mr. Carrigan first. He handles my affairs. Brandon's mask slipped completely. The charming son-in-law vanished, replaced by the shark I had seen in the police files. He leaned in close, invading my personal space, his voice dropping to a menace that made the hair on my arms stand up. Maggie, look at me. You are confused. This is exactly why we need to do this. Your memory is slipping. We can't risk you falling again and having no funds to care for you. Falling again? I asked, my voice clear. I have never fallen in this house. You might not remember, he said, and the gaslighting was so smooth it was almost impressive. But the courts will look at your age. They will look at your isolation. If you don't sign this voluntarily, well, a judge might decide you are not competent to make that choice anymore. Do you want to end up in a state facility? There it was. The threat. I set the pen down on the table with a deliberate click. You are right. Brandon, I said, dropping the act. My voice was suddenly steady, strong, and completely devoid of fear. I am old, but I am not slow. I reached into the drawer behind me and pulled out a blue folder. I slammed it onto the table on top of his fraudulent contracts. This, I said, is the deed to the O'Rourke Family Trust. As of yesterday afternoon, this house is the property of a trust overseen by the Harbour Seniors Foundation. I can't sign your papers. Brandon, I don't own the house anymore, and neither do you. The room went dead silent. Brandon froze. He stared at the blue folder, his brain trying to process the fact that his prey had moved the target. Then his face turned a violent shade of purple. You! He sputtered, veins bulging in his neck. You gave it away. To a foundation. To protect it from predators, I said coldly. He lunged forward, slamming his hand on the table so hard the coffee cups jumped. You ungrateful, paranoid old hag. Do you have any idea what I did for this deal? Do you know how many old women would kill for a chance like this? Bingo? That is enough. The kitchen door flew open with a crash. Lena Ruiz burst in, her badge raised high, followed by 2 officers in windbreakers. At the table, the notary, Marcus, suddenly shed his slouch. He stood up straight, blocked Brandon's path, and pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Brandon Hale, Marcus said, his voice booming with authority. I am placing you under arrest for wire fraud, elder abuse, and attempted grand larceny. Brandon looked around wildly, from the cops to Olivia, and finally to me. I sat still, my hands folded on the table, watching the camera lens on the spice rack catch the moment the silver handcuffs clicked around his wrists. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut seemed to snap Brandon out of his shock, but it did not make him humble. It made him vicious. He spun around, straining against Marcus's grip, his face twisted into a snarl that he directed not at the police, but at my daughter. "This is you," he screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. "You set me up, Olivia. Look at her. She has been planning to turn you against me from day one. It is a conspiracy." Olivia stood frozen by the refrigerator, her hands trembling over her mouth. She looked like a child watching a nightmare come to life. Lena stepped forward, her voice cutting through his shouting like a razor. She opened the black file in her hand. "Save it for the judge. Mr. Hale. We have statements from victims in Florida, Oregon, and Vermont. The contracts are identical. The promises are identical. Even the font is identical." She pulled a single sheet of paper from the file and held it up for Olivia to see. It was a printout of an email chain. "This is an email he sent to his partner in the shell company 3 weeks ago," Lena said calmly. Subject line: "Another coastal grab." Text body: "The daughter is useful leverage. She is desperate enough to sell her own mother out for a down payment on a condo." Olivia made a sound that was half sob, half gasp. She read the words, her eyes widening as the reality finally pierced her denial. She was not his partner. She was his tool. She slumped against the counter, sliding down until she hit the floor, burying her face in her hands. The officers began to haul Brandon toward the door. "Wait," I said. My voice was quiet, but it stopped them. My hands were still shaking slightly, but I forced them to be still. I walked up to Brandon until I was inches from his face. I wanted to see the man who thought he could erase me. "You came here thinking my age made me weak," I said, looking straight into his panicked, shifting eyes. All it did was make me patient. They dragged him out the front door, through the window. I saw the neighbors across the street peeking through their curtains. The flashing lights of the unmarked van reflected off the wet pavement. Lena touched my arm. "We have the recording," she said softly, "plus the UV ink on his hands and the testimony of the notary. It is enough to indict him on federal charges. We are going to take down the whole company. Maggie, you did good." When the police cars finally pulled away, the silence that rushed back into the house was deafening. I walked back into the kitchen. The table was still covered with the evidence of our war, the cold coffee, the uneaten eggs, the fountain pen lying on the unsigned deed. Olivia was sitting on one of the kitchen chairs now, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. She looked small and broken. "You—" she started, her voice cracking. "You knew. You knew the whole time, and you let me make a fool of myself." She looked up at me, her sadness hardening into a defensive anger. "You turned me into part of a sting operation. Mum, you didn't even trust me enough to tell me. I did not go to her. I did not hug her. I stood on the other side of the island, keeping the granite barrier between us. You are not as innocent as you want to believe." "Olivia," I said. "I didn't know he was a criminal." She protested. "No," I replied. "But you heard him say, 'Loan against the house.' You heard him say, 'We will take care of her.' Like I was a pet. You saw the way he looked at this place. You chose not to ask questions because the answers might have ruined your dream of a penthouse. You chose not to see the truth until it was convenient for you. That is the part you have to take responsibility for." Olivia stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. Then she put her head down on the table and wept. She cried for her marriage, for her pride, and for the fact that she had almost sold her mother for a life upgrade that didn't exist. I let her cry. When the tears finally stopped, I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee. "You can stay here," I said, my voice softer now, but firm. "I am not going to kick you out, but things are going to be different. You are going to get your own lawyer. You are going to talk to the investigators yourself. And you are going to get a job. I will feed you. But I am not funding you. Not anymore." She nodded, exhausted and defeated. That night, the house was finally peaceful. Olivia fell asleep on the living room sofa, curled up under an old Afghan, too ashamed to go up to the guest room she had shared with him. I sat out on the back porch, listening to the tide come in. The air smelled of salt and pine. I thought about revenge. People think revenge is loud. They think it is screaming and fighting. But as I sat there, watching the moon reflect on the dark water, I realized the sweetest revenge was simply taking back the keys to my own life. It was the ability to sit here, in my house, with my money safe and my dignity intact. The next morning, the sun came up over the bay in a blaze of orange and gold. No one woke me up. No one demanded service. I walked into the kitchen at 6 o'clock. The house was quiet. I took one plate from the cupboard. I took one fork. I poured one mug of coffee. Black. Just the way I like it. I set the place setting at the head of the table. I took a sip of the hot coffee, feeling the warmth spread through my chest. I looked at the empty chair across from me, and then I looked at the camera lens I still hadn't taken down. "If anyone wants a seat at this table from now on," I said to the empty room, "they earn it." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I really hope you enjoyed it. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment down below and let me know your city or state. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you want to hear more stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button for Grandma's Family Diary, give this video a big thumbs up, and smash that hype button to help this story reach even more people. See you in the next one.